In and Out with Professor Yalman from Radio TED University Anchor Studios. Here I am with a different edition of our podcast. I want to be your newsman today and cover what has been actually in the headlines and scope of my interest areas, which should be considered maybe subjective, but could be considered as well as objective in terms of what has been attractive for me in terms of news and global events. Nope, I'm not going to talk about the Persian Gulf. I'm not going to be talking about Trump. I'm not going to be talking about any political issues. I'm not going to be talking about economics. I want to talk about actually issues and things which are shaping up and transforming our culture. You know, self-sabotage and being victimized, all these influences that we go through in terms of making them an attachment of our lives are due to cultural burdens and social assassinations. And what I call cultural burdens and social assassinations are things which are actually being fed to us subliminally through different devices of channeling and spectrums of events. Now, number one, I want to talk about the film industry and how Netflix is influencing us by destroying Hollywood in terms of production. And the way they are doing this is using and utilizing the power of stars, but at the same time combining events and surprises in terms of their communication strategy. I don't know whether you watched it or not, but Apex maybe is not a very great film, but it has certain elements in it which sort of captivizes our attention, and we use that to sort of culturally narrate issues which can be iconic. And regardless of the topic, they give us ammunition in terms of spectrums that we can use further. Remember that guy who is haunting Charlize Theron for his evil purposes? He makes a sound there, you know. He goes, ah! And dances to a music. You know what? Right now on Instagram and TikTok, a lot of people are using that for other purposes of events or actions. But to begin something and making it the starting point of something, they're using that sound and that music. Ah! You know, that eagle, vicious sound. Another thing which actually Netflix did, despite of the subliminal effect of that iconic implant of that sound, is they put Charlize Theron at the head of this attraction where she went through interviews and she was combined with fashion, where she went to a lot of different TV shows wearing different fashion brands, but at the same time climbing up a cliff, a man-made cliff in the middle of Manhattan in a white dress, and they also put a microphone on it, and she was swearing to Netflix that she was going through that, whatever. But that was so attractive, where a lot of people, even though they didn't sort of didn't like the movie, they went back and watched the movie again, because the main issue of Netflix is not just the subscribers, but being ahead of other streaming channels that we're being exposed to. Now that's alone in itself is news, right? Like the combination of fashion, iconic sounds, and utilizing creative monogrammic actions where we can spread it further or include it in our lives. That's a cultural shift. And that didn't stop there. And all of a sudden, again, from that movie going into the launch of The Devil Wears Prada episode 2, that was another thing, because that was right before the Met Gala, and the content of the entire movie was not actually Miranda or Vogue or whatever. It was actually how data people, like the high-tech people, or the people who used to be nerds but now they're the gentlemen of our age, are actually corrupted by the idea of destroying certain things we thought was tradition and heritage. Now, and the way they exposed that in their story was very resembling to the real life. And that brings me to the story of Jeff Bezos and his wife, being part of the Met Gala, and how actually the editor of Vogue was, shifting in terms of her perception of doing things into the will of money, and how money was buying itself into even the most molding and crucial rules that people thought were not changeable. And exactly that was happening in the movie as well. Exactly that is happening in actually real life. And the way The Devil Wears Prada 2 and the Met Gala was combined, and then the message went through. And and that brings me to also the fact of, as soon as those kind of men, this sounds a bit sexist, but as soon as those kind of men are in power with money, what they do is they change their companions, their wives. They go for different looking people, and they either get married or they go through affairs. So a subliminal sabotage of their happiness or their heritage themselves, going into what was oppressed and suppressed actually throughout their youth, and how that is influencing how they are reshaping the industries they're in, and all of a sudden how inconsiderate they have become. That's why, for example, the ex-workers of Amazon was protesting by having this slideshow, a projector show actually on the loft, actually where outside wall of the loft where Jeff Bezos was living, and they were like narrating the true stories, and that became an issue as well. Talking about the Met itself, all of a sudden, the way it has changed culturally as well, from the gathering point of Gusto and certain prominent people, to actually people who have become famous and established their circles or went into those circles. So all of a sudden you can be like the greatest guy or the greatest woman on earth, but as soon as you land into this fame spectrum, then you become a dish or an attraction of a certain group of people, where they like to be around you, and all of a sudden, of course, you like to be around them, and the entire friend circle changes. And should it be like that? I don't know, because what is the value, I ask always, when things like that happen? What is the value when your friend circle changes as soon as you land into fame and money and start buying expensive things and leading an expensive calendar? Not just life, but a calendar. You're at Roland Garros, and then you go to Monaco watching the F1, and then you're in Wimbledon, and then comes certain events where you are at Nice and Tahiti, etc. And then from there, your fall calendar starts with U.S. Open, and then and then comes the parties of. The parties where you end up in Halloween events, and a certain calendar, like they go to certain places, and all of a sudden they're invited with those crowds to certain areas. De La Rus Awards was like that as well. For example, Eileen and Alcaraz and Sinner, and why are they invited to those things? Because they're like great talkers and great content people? No, they are successful in the spectrum they are, and they became role models to a greater society of people who are like trying to be like them, where through them a lot of sales are happening. A lot of things are being actually manufactured and produced, and like improving and skyrocketing the sales of those companies. One being, for example, Nike or Asics or whatever, and all of a sudden they become the sports person of the year, the sports enthusiast of the year, whatever. Not just because they are a great sports figure, but through them, a lot of sales are being done. How ethical that is, or how moral that is, I leave it up to you. And that brings me to, for example, also things like the soccer arena, and the arena in soccer is also having its all fair share of shifts and changes, where powerhouses like Real Madrid, where stars align and where stars are being produced, etc., are not being successful anymore. Where all of a sudden, like Paris Saint-Germain, a very very young team who won the Champions League last year, is also now the finalist for this year, and their coach Enrique, and he's like also has become the symbol, after Pep Guardiola and Johan Cruyff, etc., of totalitarian football. I would say total football, a team, acting and as a mechanism and feeling each other, etc. Whereas actually another supporter of that philosophy is Arda, who's now training the team from Ukraine, and they're also having a great headline where just a bunch of guys from Ukraine, where people are in war and they have to play their entire league and games abroad. And they stick together, and they try to sort of not just go for a result, but the process. They enjoy the process of being together and having the same ideals and values. And so those, among all these cultural sabotage, among these cultural burdens, these sort of people like Arda and from the Ukrainian football team, he's the coach, like Enrique with Paris Saint-Germain, etc., are reminding us, actually, we might be going through difficult things. We might be going through, we might be new. We might be not stars yet, but we can build stars out of teams, out of people, out of approaches. And it's not always the money or the results which actually win the hearts and touch the hearts of people. And and coming to the stars and players and the messages, also, which was very interesting for me, was to find out that the tennis players, they had this conference, and Sabalenka was one of them as well, indicating that they found the prize money, which was shared in Roland Garros, just too little, and they said, hey, you are making all this because of us, and you're sharing with us a minimal parts of it, and we might boycott. And that's also very interesting, because all of a sudden the attractiveness of the platforms are not validated anymore. The we the justification and the just part of the receiving is also being questioned, and people are waking up. You might call it materialistic, yeah, but that's an approach, and it has been never done before. Where people talk about a platform and say, what you're sharing with us is not enough for us. And, the way you shine is because of us, not just because of Roland Garros or Wimbledon, whatever. It's not just a platform. It's us making the headlines, and we are the content. And therefore, like, the content is becoming more and more valuable, actually, despite of the fact what the platform is, I think. And yeah, these are like a couple of things which sort of attracted me in terms of news value, and of course, every news value for everybody else is different. But I think it's an important thing that we are able to select our casts and news and topics, and sort of build our interest areas, which actually helps us improve and enlarge our perimeter, or of the circumference that we're living in. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was complaining of the fact that things start during the morning with burdens and blasts and guilt and all sort of accusements and whatever. And she said, I have to sort of go through that the entire day, and I can't leave that because I don't want to do that, I don't want to do this, whatever. And I said, it's your time right now, in terms of you're young, and you shouldn't be leading a life, aching for the past, or you shouldn't be leading a life, waiting for the future. And you're breathing, and you're going through, and don't let your body take over in terms of the aches, the pains, because the body stores, and it stores the traumas, it stores the depressions that we go through, it stores actually things which are bothering us, and all of a sudden it starts sort of leading us rather than the body leads us. Actually, our mind should be capable of good analysis and differentiation, and along with the heart, we should be freeing ourselves from these burdens. So to be able to free ourselves, she asked, what should we do? I said, just step out of the circle. Just step out of the circle. Don't be part of that. Just look at yourself from outside, from outside. You change your perspective. And once you change your perspective, when you look at things, you can see how easily you are being influenced and manipulated. Just step out of the circle, and what happens if you don't do that? What happens if you don't deal with it? What happens if you don't play the game as they want you to play the game? Just set your own rules. And there are great people out there who have diminished that, the influence of others. For example, and Winthrop, if you want to meet with her, she has a 3-minute rule where you have to sort of ask, or you have to sort of present something to her in 3 minutes. The first minute is, to attract her attention. The second minute, you sort of talk about the the issue. And the last minute is you have to provide a solution to the actually thing that you're presenting. So, do that in your life. Just, diminish people, the time you allocate for them, to 3 minutes if you're not sort of comfortable with their presentation and representation of what they bring into your life. And everybody has an expiration date. Yeah, every issue has an expiration date, and we even have an expiration date on this world. Yes, longevity right now kicks in. A lot of people are going through genetic coding and research, and they want to discover what diseases they might sort of face in the future, so they get treatment, so they live longer. maybe you shouldn't live longer. Maybe, in the old good times, it was good to live, 60 years, 40 years, whatever. I can see it from my own perspective as well. I'm 58 years old right now, and it's, you think about aging and not being able to perform the things that you love to do, and you start sort of, searching for different meanings in life in terms of production and content and action. But when you look at the photographs of last year or 10 years ago, and the things you might not be able to do in the next 15 or 20 years, that's interesting, to face that, to deal with that, to prolong it. I don't know. I know that's another thing, Joe. So just don't go into any circles, and those circles are. And those perimeters are created not just by you, but you letting those things influence you. And again, if you sit there in front of TV and watch bad news, you're going to be thinking about things. If you watch there looking at, fashion, rich people, etc., you're going to be thinking about that. But, if you have your own philosophy in terms of anything, like I have my own philosophy about driving a car, I wouldn't buy a car until I can afford a Ferrari, for example, because I like aesthetics. And for me, driving a car is not going from A point to B point. It's it's a festive thing, and I like that roaring engine. I like that unique, authentic sound. And electric cars is not for me. I wouldn't want to drive. I wouldn't want to drive an electric car. Who cares, Yeah, but so if I'm not gonna be able to buy a car like that, then my perspective is then I will be driven, either by a taxi or a Uber or the metro or whatever. I'll be driven. So perspective and parameters, and the circumference around it, we shape it up with the external influences, but then our inner light, it wants to come out, and it will only come out if you step outside that circle and look at yourself and analyze yourself. So that's in a nutshell, actually, what I want to sort of have you think, maybe, or plant a thinking seed maybe this weekend for you. At In and Out with Professor Yalman, yes, we do have nice guests, but now, today, I just want to sort of bring into your attention a couple of newsworthy events from my perspective, and bring a certain reasoning to you as you sit down and sip your coffee or tea, and remind yourself of you, and what you and how you and why you are the reason of your life. In and Out with Professor Yalman from Radio TED-U, TED University Anchor Studios. And as I always say, don't make anything become an expectation. And don't surround yourself with problems. Just step out and look at that circle. And if you don't like that circle, establish a new circle. But have it as a spiral movement where you have an open end to eternal development. So move away from delusion. But it's good to have an illusion. In and Out with Professor Yalman, a big hug to all of you, and have a great weekend. And I'll be here with new stories and questions and reasonings and guests next week.